All right, Steve. Well, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
Sure, bud.
Hey, so one thing I'd been dying to talk to you about is how you got into the roasting business. Not just coffee, but just the roasting business.
This is all my hobby gone horribly wrong.
Right.
I ended up, I designed and built machinery and process equipment for industry for really a long time 25, 28 years.
Mm.
And at some point, you know, I was, I was always a lover of coffee because that's kind of what business is fueled by. So I, I started screwing around with home espresso, and I had, you buy the machinery, you buy the grinder, you buy the espresso machine, you buy the Techniform brewer, you buy an endless succession of grinders and coffee junk, and then eventually, your coffee still isn't very good because you don't know anything about coffee. So I thought, well, it must be the coffee I'm buying, so I had to start roasting coffee. So after ruining hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of perfectly innocent coffee. Um, I just like everybody else, I started screwing around with a popcorn popper on the deck, blowing chaff all over the neighborhood.
Right.
And I cycled through a Baymore, and I had sauna frescoes, and I built a half a dozen, five, I guess I'll round up. I built five fluid bed roasters because everybody said, oh, they're exactly the same. Yeah, they're not. That's not a thing. And eventually I had done business in China since 94, and I ended up buying a machine from a guy out of Taiwan who was building in China. And the wiring was dangerous because in the United States we use phase opposed 240, which means 120 volts on either side of the circuit. So all of our electrical stuff is dual pole switched. And China's not like that. They run a straight 220 to neutral. So one of the things that happens to people all the time is they'll run these Chinese machines, and they'll get zapped, right?
Right.
And it's just kind of cost of doing business. Nobody really thinks about it much, and nothing happens unless you're standing in a puddle of water.
Right.
so if you're roasting in a leaky garage, you better wear electrical service shoes.
Right. Note taking.
People don't know. And that's the thing, right? People don't know. So when I started Mill City, I'll tell you what I really thought. Before I done this, I flew out to Seattle. I visited all the manufacturers. I was just buy a roaster because my roasters failed, right? So I thought, okay, you can't beat a dog at your own game. So I flew out to Seattle, and I was going to buy a commercial roaster. And dude, I talked to those guys, and they were just completely full of goose grease. It wasn't real stuff. Dude, guys are telling me, oh, you got to have this magic metal drum, or, oh,
Right.
you got to have this burner set. And I'm thinking, I don't know, man. I've been designing stuff like this for 28 years now. I can think of 50 ways to design around that if that's a problem. So none of that it just wasn't real stuff.
Right.
And those guys weren't lying. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, they're falsifying something. I mean, they don't know because they don't roast coffee.
Right.
So, the other thought I had was coffee's supposed to be $150 billion a year thing. And every single seed has to be roasted, or most of them anyway. You get the idea?
Yeah.
So, and I watch these small producers, I watch the little guys starting out. So like you got to get this. So the reason that you are super jazzed about the coffee community is because coffee is a sensory driven process. And bright, interesting, kind, intelligent, well-meaning human beings exchange information with each other at a much higher level of efficiency. So that
Right.
the virtuous cycle in coffee is the best people in coffee kind of tend to be the best people. They're people you want to know, the people you want to hang around. It's super attractive. I mean, it's really a neat thing.
For sure.
And where a lot of these kids come from, and you got to get this too, because this kind of described my history a little bit. Guys, people come from rough neighborhood, rough background, rough family, bad school, whatever it is. They don't get much traction in life early on, and college really ain't an option for them. Okay.
Right.
So they end up, they graduate school, they got to get a job. They take an entry level job, front of the house behind an espresso machine. And for the first time in their lives, they're good at something. I mean, really good at something. They're super jazzed about coffee. They're super excited about the industry, but still an entry level job. So the industry almost demands that, these folks, if they're ever going to make enough money to buy a house or raise a family, they got to start their own thing. And these are unsophisticated buyers. They don't have a lot of life experience. They're young people.
Right.
So they're easy prey for the guy that comes up and starts talking about, hey, this is perfect every time. This espresso machine, perfect shots this roaster, perfect every time. As a professional entrepreneur, which incidentally is French for serial failure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It offended me. It just made me mad. So I thought, okay, we're going to do a thing here where we are almost like a small business incubator. Like, I'm going to take people and we're going to bring them into this industry as peers. We're going to build a little better machine. We're going to do a little better support. We're going to, teach them how to make money with a roaster. Not all this, pie in the sky twee, this super theoretical thing, no. Good, better, best.
Right.
Right. And, somewhere in that spectrum is saleable. It depends on what your market is, depends on what your sales channel is, depends on who your customer is. Right.
Yes.
So we equip these guys to kind of meet the need that's in front of them today, where they can kind of grow in wisdom and understanding and get better at this. If they because this whole thing is just a huge process. They keep touching the bases, they get better and better and better. And I'll challenge you right now. You do this, you jump on the Instagram feed, there's about 7,000 guys standing there with their roasters. If you order coffee from any 10 of them, about 8 bags of coffee are going to be pretty solid. It's coffee you're going to want to drink. You're not going to throw it away.
Right.
A couple of them are going to be a little rough, okay? Because everybody's starting out at some place.
Right.
But 8 out of 10, and I've done this. I mean, I'm not just drinking my own Kool-Aid. I buy a lot of coffee. I buy a lot of coffee from a lot of roasteries. And if you do that with any other manufacturer, you're batting 1,000, you get 4 or 5 out of 10.
Right.
Because the people that find their way to us are super jazzed about quality. They really want to do the work. And we've equipped them to kind of be a little, just marginally, a little tiny bit more successful.
Right.
It's not a killer thing. It's not a guarantee. But it's just a little edge in a competitive market that puts these guys over the top.
So how oversaturated would you say the market is? I know you're giving these guys and gals opportunities, but as far as like every other company, how oversaturated do you think the market is, and how much quality does it lack from other businesses? And I'm not trying to slander any other businesses, but just in your opinion.
Not at all. Zero.
Okay.
Because here's the thing, right? We're on a spectrum, and I want you to think about, this is a little new. This will be a little new to you, I think. I want you to think about utility coffee that people are drinking to wake up and get out the door in the morning to do whatever they got to do.
Right.
That the effect of that coffee is much more valuable than the taste.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Get it and go. You can put an espresso into that category. You can put K-cup into that category. You know, this is kind of, again, it's coffee for effect. It's a utility product versus beverage coffee, right? Beverage coffee, people are drinking at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because it tastes good. It's not just that single cup a day to get you going.
Right.
So there's a couple things. The trend in quality throughout the market is upwards and to the right. If you were to graph this out on the curve, you know, where right is better, left is poorer. Quality has taken a marked increase just in the last 10 years.
Right.
I mean, just in the recent past. And that's driven by, there's better green coffee because people, you know, we flatten the world out with the internet, and people at Origin are reading Facebook. They're they're in forums. They're getting feedback from roasteries, boots on the ground, about their coffee and what what people value in coffee. And there's talk, we talk about anaerobic processing, or we talk about, different varietals, all this new stuff. Well, all of that is super good and exciting, and that's kind of cutting edge stuff. But baseline coffee is enormously cleaner processed than it was even 10 years ago.
For sure. So
we got better greens, a lot better. There's a much better, much higher quality greens available to every roastery in the world, everywhere, in quantities previously unheard of in the industry. You get better roasters. When we started out, we pioneered data logging. I mean, it was like, the other manufacturers are like, well, you can have a bean temperature probe and it's, $1,000 to $5,000. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, that's a $19 thermocouple and a $50 USB interface.
Right.
Let's just stick one on every roaster.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing. Variable drum and fan speed. Why not? It's $100 VFD. Maybe the motor costs $50 more. Why not do that? So, and then as time went on, we kind of learned how to use that to get better coffee.
Right.
We built a tool, and I didn't know how to, honestly, I just thought, okay, well, why wouldn't you do this?
Yep.
Because I'm interested in it. I want to see what happens. And then as it turned out later on, yeah, it's actually pretty cool. There's some really neat stuff you can do with that kind of thing. And now, look, the first thing that happened was Diedrich copied my website, Probat copied my website, Sanford copied everybody copied our stuff.
Right.
All of a sudden, Probat's doing videos. Everybody's teaching coffee. They bring in contractors to do their little class, right? None of these guys roast for a living. I mean, it's cool. Thank God. I mean, there's more interest. There's more demand. I mean, we've kind of leveled up a little bit, and it's great. So the answer to your question, is that process over? And the answer is no. And the reason is because the installed base of roasters in this country or in North America today, the average age of a roaster is probably something like 12 or 15 years old. Because guys, you jump on Craigslist, you drag back your roaster in the back of your pickup truck, and you cobble it together with bee venting and hope you don't burn your building down, and you throw a bunch of shit against the wall and hope something tastes good, right?
Right.
That's what guys do. Because they don't, they're startups and they're limited in their capital. So, we provided kind of an affordable way, a little less barrier to entry to a higher quality thing, higher quality experience, higher quality support. And dude, we've helped something like 7,000 people launch successful roasteries.
That's awesome.
Right. And listen, as long as we're talking about this, for the 18 people that are going to listen to this in the next 6 months, right? Angie Davis, my vice president here, she mentioned the other day, we still build in China. We assemble our roasters in Shenzhen. We float them across the ocean. And it's like, we're getting hammered with made in the USA and yeah, whatever. I don't care. Here's the deal. When I build a tool overseas, that puts a better thing within reach to start their business, what is the economic impact? What's the difference in economic impact between employing 4 welders here in Minneapolis, right, versus making that machine available to people all over the planet to feed their families?
For sure.
I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think I'm tripping on it very much. Okay.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So that's, but I do get the thing once in a while, somebody would be like, that's unpatriotic. Hey, dude, listen, I carried loaded weapons in places people were shooting at me. Okay.
Right.
I got the tattoo. I paid my dues.
Right.
Kiss my ass. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I don't think anyone is doing it quite like you guys at Mill City as far as giving out the educational material to roasters. I haven't seen anything like that. It's like you guys are trying to build this community. You're trying to give everyone the opportunity to learn different variables on how to roast coffee, and I just think it's amazing. And you just don't stop learning. I think I watched that recent little short video of you where you're like, "Hey, I snuck into the roastery over the weekend." So I watched that, and I was like, "You never stop learning," and you guys are just putting out amazing content.
No, I did that because I, for real, this is the God's honest truth. I worked out. I was standing in the shower on a Saturday, and I didn't have much going on. I wasn't covering tech support. My son was doing that. He was handling tech support that weekend, and there wasn't. I didn't have anything to do.
Right.
And I thought, man, I should go run this new version of Roast Path and see what happens. And then my very next thought was, I'm gonna be real with you, okay? This will be terrible. I hope nobody watches this.
No, it's all good.
Want to buy a roaster again.
Right.
Like I've spent 25, 30,000 hours behind the desk over here, right? Thinking about roasting, working on roasters, going to the roastery, testing. We've roasted hundreds of thousands of pounds of coffee testing these machines, right?
Right.
And sometimes people call in and they've got like really screwball problems, right? Like, there's a bunch of seeds beneath the drum. Well, adjust your drum gap mechanism. Like I only worked 3 years to build that. Okay. So you unscrew the thing and turn the knob and it closes the gap. But I had the thought that maybe I should kind of challenge myself in a way where I was like totally out of my comfort zone, just to feel what people felt like.
Right.
And I grabbed, again, for anybody that's roasted a bunch of coffee, I grabbed an unknown decaf, which doesn't crack. Sometimes it cracks, sometimes it doesn't crack. And it's dark, so you don't know what the development is. And I never cupped it. I never touched this coffee. I had zero knowledge of this coffee. It was just a bag of unfamiliar green. And I did it at a batch size that I've never done before on the 2K, right? I mean, I've done like 50 gram batch sizes, I've done 100 gram batch sizes, I've done 2.5 kilogram batch sizes on the 2K, lots of them. I know how to do those. I've never done a 500 gram. I had no idea what my preheat needed to be for this green. And I just worked my way through it. And it only took a couple hours because, Hey man, I got chops. I'm cool. But, it was a really good, it was a little humble because coffee is very humbling.
For sure.
Right. It's a humbling experience. It's like, okay. And finally the 6th roast, it was just the thing where, okay, I'm just going to let the coffee go where it wants to go. And that turned out to be kind of the killer thing.
How did it taste? Like what? I know you marked a smiley face on one of the bags. So how did it taste?
Listen, here's a crazy thing about this. And this is an internal discussion. This is kind of super high level, professional roaster, angels dancing on the head of a pin stuff. Right.
Right.
But Cafe Imports scored that coffee at 81 points. And I'm going to tell you right now, that coffee cups out probably like an 84, 85 something like that.
Okay.
That is a fantastic decaf.
For sure.
It's just unbelievably great. I can't even describe to you how amazing it is. It's got body, it's got sweetness, it's got some
What's the name of that again, Steve? My wife is looking for a decaf, so
It's a Peruvian decaf on our website.
okay.
And there's not much of it left. There's like 100 pounds or something.
Right.
So, but here's the crazy thing about it. They scored this in 81. And I think what happened was, so, there's a ditch on both sides of every road, right? You can't sample roast, any way you want. You kind of need to sample roast in a way that, allows you to get apples to apples comparison of greens, right? And sample roasts are traditionally, they're small batches, they're roasted pretty fast. They're intentionally underdeveloped to highlight processing defect, right? So like, for instance, if I was going to do a sample roast on the 500 gram sample roaster, I'd probably charge at, 375 degrees. I'd run a 300 gram charge. My drum speed would be something like maybe 60 RPM, 58 RPM. I'd run a low airflow and, kind of a medium heat. And I'd bring that coffee to a green to yellow transition, which is a scent change. It's not a color change.
Right.
We say end of drying is a color change. And, if you're hitting first crack around 390, you're going to see the color change about 300, most coffees. If you pull the trier and you start smelling the seed, what's going to happen is it's going to go like drying straw, drying hay, drying grass. And from 1 second to the next, it's going to start to smell like some kind of baking, like a carbohydrate, like cookies or biscuits.
Okay.
It's going to get sweet, right? And that's green to yellow transition. That marks the start of the Maillard phase on the outer portion of the seed. Like the hottest portion of the seed at that moment, that's Maillard range temperature. And that's typically, again, if you're at first crack at 390, that's about 330. Got it? Now, this is a very useful metric because you're marking this Maillard, the start of Maillard, rather than the color change, because a color change, it can vary wildly depending on the density or the moisture content of the seed, or even the size of the seed. So the green to yellow transition marker is a little more effective for craft roasting, in my opinion. That's what we do here, and that's what I teach. This is what we do. So again, to be redundant, I'm going to hit green to yellow probably 4:15. It's pretty fast roast. About 3 minutes later, about 7 minutes, I'm going to hit first crack. I'm probably going to give it a minute 15 development. And if I'm at 390 for first crack, I'm probably going to discharge that coffee about 394, 395, something like that. Okay. The coffee is very much intentionally underdeveloped to highlight processing defect. That's a sample roast. Okay. Now, it's a pretty good idea to stay, with most coffees, really good idea to stay in a relatively narrow band of roasts, so that, what you don't want to do is judge a green coffee that's had more development time relative to another green coffee, right? Because you'll be like, oh, well, it's more developed. You won't automatically recognize a difference in the roast, but you will pick it up in the cup. It'll be maybe a little more body. So the intensity of score on the SCA cupping form or in your cupping sheet is going to be a little higher, and it throws your scoring off. You get it?
Yep.
Where the ditch is when you're working with coffees that are outside of that range. So if I'm doing a big, fat, soft Indonesian or a decaf, right, I'm going to have to change that sample roast to fairly score that coffee. Get it? And the reason that's so important is because somebody put a bunch of work into that coffee,
For sure.
right?
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of talk about fair trade or farm gate or where producers really get paid is when they bring a superior coffee to market and somebody doesn't ruin it. They develop a reputation for good product, right? Now all of a sudden as a roastery, hey, I really value this Peru coffee. I want to buy that again, right? And I'm going to pay a little more for that because my experience with that's super positive. That's how we elevate the industry. That's how we take care of producers. We
Okay.
do a good job with a product rather than just burning it up.
For sure.
So this is, again, this in this case, I think Cafe probably adhered a little too rigorously to a sample roast protocol that didn't do this coffee any favors whatsoever, and they ended up scoring it very low.
Gotcha.
So it's a good find for me. It's probably $1 cheaper than it should have been.
For sure. So did you get into roasting? Well, so I know you said you were carrying a gun overseas. Did you get into roasting while you were in, or were you out by this time?
No, I just got into trouble.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I was a salty Marine.
Okay. Yeah, so I did 6 years over there. So a lot of people before I switched over, a lot of guys were getting into roasting before I got out. So that was pretty neat to hear.
That's that some of that's our YouTube channel. I mean, there's a lot of interesting coffee, and it's a better experience for a lot of people. I mean, look, right now today, if you go to Pilot Truck Stop and get their special reserve Machu Picchu coffee out of their brewer, it's pretty great. It's like unbelievably good. You know, it's not a super hoity-toity fancy pants deal.
Right.
But let me tell you, man, if we drive the big red roast rig all over the country. If I'm 10 hours into an 11-hour driving shift, man, that stuff is a gift from God.
For sure. So, what if you had to pick? What was one of the biggest difficulties you faced starting roasting? Like when you started up Mill City, what was the biggest hurdle that you had to jump?
Well, I think it was imposter syndrome, right? Because
Right.
you're like doing this thing, and you're supposed to be, you're supposed to know something, and even after, I think what happened is for me, I was very fortunate. I didn't, I came from someplace else, and I had a pretty successful thing someplace else.
Right.
I was sort of a fully formed business guy, and professional human. So, I started in coffee, and it's like I started taking classes because I could afford to do that, right? I flew all over the country. I took classes with everybody that was somebody, and I learned a lot. But I also, I was examining all that critically too. I was like, okay, is this a thing? Because I got a lot of experience, and I'm thinking that what you're telling me is really interesting and neat. I don't think that's making anybody any money.
Right.
So, I just had a really very different perspective. And so when I started, it was the first couple of years, first maybe 2, 3, 4 years, I was hanging out with really smart, really capable coffee people, right? Names
Right.
if I say, oh, so and so and blah blah blah, you're like, oh yeah, that guy.
Hmm.
But it wasn't very long before I kind of saw the limitations, because most people in coffee have a very narrow experience by necessity, because you're trying to earn a living, right? You find your niche, and you kind of stay in your lane, and you grow where you're planted. You mine the gold mine that you're hovering over,
Hmm.
right? So dudes, have very limited experience with there's very few people with a lot of broad experience in coffee. It's pretty narrowly focused. And the other
For
thing
sure.
is, what you're going to find is, a lot of these people are entrepreneurs, right? And that's, you want to talk about Ranger School or the Marine Corps, esprit de corps or whatever it is, this feeling you're carrying around, like, I am the master of the universe.
Right.
Dude, successful entrepreneurs that have been through some stuff, those dudes are hardcore.
For sure.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to tell you something. This may be the only valuable thing that I say today. If you're starting a business and you're looking at other people and you're thinking you're going to emulate them, it's good to draw inspiration from people, but you got to know that you got to find your own thing. You got to keep your eyes on your own paper, because you don't know what's going on with somebody else's thing. You don't
Right.
see behind the curtain. You don't know how they're treating their employees or their family. You don't know what kind of house of cards they've got in terms of debt. You see what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I had this thing years ago. I talk about it in class sometimes. I was on baller status. I was making a bunch of money. I'm driving around and everybody's driving a Mercedes. And I thought I should have a Mercedes. And, one day I realized they're all leased. Nobody owns
Right.
that car. It's like they went to rent a center and they pay $800 a month to drive this thing. I own my stuff. You follow me?
Yeah.
So it's easy to put on a show. It's easy to put on a front. And there's a lot of that, and I guess what I want to say, I don't want to say this, I don't want to talk about this like it's a negative thing. This isn't a pejorative. It's just identifying kind of when you are looking from the outside at these folks, you should keep in mind that, you don't really know what's behind that. You really got to focus on your own thing. You got to raise some capital. You got to make enough money to accumulate some capital, to create opportunity, to grow and expand and scale. And it's like the best example I can give you. It's like having a 5-gallon bucket, and every single day you get to drop one tiny little eye drop of water in there, one tiny little drop.
Right.
The only magic in life or business is sustained effort over time.
Okay.
And to the extent that, you do the right things, you build a solid brand, you do a solid product, you treat people right, you can have everything you want in life as long as you let everybody around you get what they want, right?
Right.
Disproportionately, you will be positioned to take advantage of luck when it happens, right? You're just playing the odds. There's no killer business plan. There's no, I'm going to do this and I'm going to put me over the edge. Yeah, some people do that. Never happened to me, right? I'm just grinding it out every day, doing the best I can for my people and my family.
For sure. So do you see, I guess, individuals getting into the coffee industry with not quality in mind, and they pretty much are just trying to make a quick buck because they see that right now that coffee is on the uprise, that they're just going to try to jump on the train and start making coffee?
Yeah, ever heard of somebody called Bellwether?
Yeah.
What do you think that is? That's
For
that's
sure.
that's not a real thing.
Right.
I mean, have you had some coffee out of there? I mean, 1 in 100 guys coax something decent out of that machine, and they only do it for a couple of days before it breaks.
Right.
Right? It's not a real thing. I mean, you can if you get $40 million in investment, you can buy a bunch of ads. You can say anything you want, and people start talking about it like it's real.
Right.
There's a lot of that in coffee, man. I mean, there's a lot of that in coffee. So but look, I'm going to take my own advice. I'm just going to keep my eyes on my own paper.
For sure.
I'm probably going to I'm going to outlast them. I'll be here after they can't get any more free money, and you know what? God bless them. listen, on the other side of this, there's another thing too. If people, if you're a shop and you can't vent a roaster, you're in the first floor of a 10-story building, and this is the only thing you can do to participate in this industry. Well, God bless you. Knock yourself out. I wish you the best. It's cool.
Right.
And maybe you get some experience, maybe it grows your brand, maybe you accumulate some money, maybe it puts you in a position where, you can probably invest in something a little better, a little more productive. But again, I got a hard time. I'm going to tell you, I'll bare my soul. Okay. I'm like two people.
Right.
On the one hand, I'm still pretty salty. Okay. It's like, I'm going to call bullshit when I see bullshit. Okay?
100%. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm almost 60 and I should probably grow up pretty soon. Okay.
I think you're good, Steve.
I don't know, man. I have moments like daily, but it's like, okay, I got to be thinking about peace, prosperity, abundance, health, wealth, and happiness. I just got to keep my eyes on my own paper and do the best I can for everybody around me. And not throw out the baby with the bathwater. If it's a utility thing for somebody, great. Coffee's big enough for everybody. So that which kind of goes back to your question. Number one, do people do this for money? Yeah, they're only doing coffee because it's an easier thing. They're amateur entrepreneurs. They buy the cheapest roaster they can. They're trying to figure out combustion gas venting on Facebook, which blows my mind. Oh, my roaster won't ignite. What do I do? Somebody tell me on Facebook. Okay, really? Do you live in that house? Are you nuts?
Right.
I've seen and part of it's because people call me. I'm like the doctor that thinks everybody's sick, right? Like you go to the doctor and they're like, you should quit smoking or you should lower your blood pressure. Everybody they see is sick.
Right.
Got it? They think everybody's sick. Guys call me and they're like, oh my God, I just had this huge chimney fire. I need a new roaster next week. What do you got in stock? I get that call once a week, right? I get the call where the guys blow the doors off their chaff collector because their gas is adjusted wrong. Oh, my chaff collector just exploded. What do I do? Well, I think you should get a gas guy over immediately and turn the gas off. People, I've seen people like these old machines, like dudes are all like, oh, I'm going to get this super cool old Probat. Well, dude, that machine came from Germany and it was wired for 480 volts and somebody converted it in their garage.
Right.
Right. And then you're plugging it in and zapping yourself. These are all real things. I've seen people do this. Right. So, what happens with the guys that are doing this only for money, there's a market for their coffee. If folks are buying stale supermarket coffee and all of a sudden dude's roasting fresh supermarket coffee, it's a huge thing. It's a big increase in quality. Okay, that's cool. And he's going to make $5-6 a pound. And he may scale. People drink any damn thing. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So he's earning a living and he's doing his thing. He's feeding his family. God bless him. But he only owns his own job. When he leaves the industry, his brand dies.
For sure.
Ain't nobody buying that. There's no value there. So when I talk about sometimes in class elevating and professionalizing the specialty coffee industry, it's coming from a place where I'm trying to help people to build local, scalable, sustainable brands where their brand equity is high enough that, if it comes time to exit the business, somebody will actually pay them for it.
Right.
Like your brand is worth something.
For sure.
And that's you know, that's a little, the way that we do that, the way that we preach that is we talk about differentiating yourself in the market with quality. It's just embracing the process, buying better greens, doing better roasting, learning to cup better, learning the skills of professional roastery, be a better business guy, make your facility look like someplace, somebody wants to put something in their mouth out of.
Right.
Dudes are roasting in their garage and there's grease on the floor and dogs roaming around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your roastery should be one of your biggest sales tools. Guys walk in, looks like an operating theater. You're going to show them, you're going to activate this process. I cupped 18 coffees to pick this green. I roasted this, 13 different ways before I decided on this roast profile, right? We run everything we do through the destoner to protect your grinder. You make your thing, part of your the way that you show value. Your coffee is worth more. And then you activate the coffee. We're creating a coffee that's balanced in terms of sweetness, body, and acidity. It's got supporting acidity to magnify the sweetness. This is going to be good as an espresso. It's good as a brewed coffee. And, if you're a professional, if you've had a little bit of training, you got a little bit of experience, all of this is real.
Right.
It's not a marketing pitch. It's not manipulative. It's not exploitative. It's a real thing. This is what we do to bring a better cup to my local community.
For sure.
That builds brand advocacy and it builds brand loyalty. That's the way you build brands. It's successful brands. So is there room for that? Absolutely, there's room for that. Everywhere that a guy wants to make those personal connections across that cup.
So what advice would you mentioned roasting at home and stuff. So anyone that's getting into the business from the get-go, let's say they're taking that step, they've had this specialty coffee and they're hooked on it, and now they're wanting to start roasting, they want to get into the business. What step would you take? Now, you don't have to go too far deep in the rabbit hole, Steve, because I know you got all this information, but what step would these guys take, or do they need to take to be successful in the beginning?
They should take my class. Like, duh.
Right.
We do those classes at cost, man.
For sure. Yeah.
Where, the YouTube channel is great, but it pales in comparison. We spend 2 solid days roasting and cupping.
Right.
I mean, we do 1 day of classroom time that we do remotely now. We figured that out during COVID, so that was cool. Mm-hmm. That was a net gain. Instead of sitting at the whiteboard to listen to us drone on, you can sit on your couch and listen to us drone on.
Right.
But that's the nuts and bolts professional coffee terminology and philosophy and understanding, of what is a washed processed coffee, what is a natural processed coffee, what are the roast phases and events that you should be, just again, it's the textbook classroom stuff. We can whale through that in about 5 hours.
Right.
And then we spend 2 days, two full days roasting and cupping, because that's where it's at. Roasting is a physical skill. There's nothing that replaces that, because to be successful with the roaster, you have to navigate to the equilibrium point where you got to navigate to the equilibrium point of the latent heat energy in the system at your target rate of rise for that moment. And if you can do that, any change in input now shows up directly in your thermometry, in your bean temp, your drum temp, your environmental temp, right?
Right.
So you're kind of surfing this equilibrium point with every degree in increase in temperature, because it changes. And the way that coffee takes heat, here, I'll let you in on a clue. This is good stuff. What happens with the reason that coffee is so frustrating, there's a couple reasons. The first one is it's not homogeneous. You look at a bunch of seeds and you think they look all the same. They're not. They vary in size and moisture content and density. So even from batch to batch, that can shift in ways that kind of throw you off a little bit. That's number one. Number two, as coffee roasts, the first thing that happens is you drive off this free moisture. So 12% moisture down to effectively zero by the time you hit green to yellow transition, right? So in that period, the coffee is repelling the absorption of heat. So you're going to manipulate your airflow and your fuel settings, your preheat, to kind of overcome the inertia of that moisture content. But then when you hit this Maillard temperature range, what happens is during Maillard, the coffee expels massive amounts of carbon dioxide, and that repels heat also, right? So now you're overcoming that pressure, that gas that's kind of diffusing the absorption of heat into the seed. So you're going to run a little hotter, right?
Right.
But then, and you've seen this, if anybody's roasted coffee and grafted out, you know that point where all of a sudden the coffee wants to take heat like crazy?
Yes.
That's the end of Maillard. You're outside of the Maillard range of temperature, and that carbon dioxide goes to effectively zero, right? So you have to control the roast, you have to anticipate that. You have to take action to reduce the latent heat energy in the system to kind of guide you through that without losing control. People call that exothermic. It's not. It is not exothermic. It's only this carbon dioxide. That's what it is.
Okay.
What happens next? Well, about 10 degrees later, you hit first crack. Guess what? Now you're releasing a bunch of moisture again, and the coffee it's repelling moisture. You see, you got to thread this needle through these events. You got to manage the energy in the system through the events to have very precise control.
For sure.
So it's something that, we have a very, very sophisticated digital control roasters. We have roast path automation, very sophisticated, extremely sophisticated thing. The operator has to thread that needle in order for the system to replicate it. So that the people often they come and they're like, oh, we don't know how to roast. We want an automatic roaster. Well, all you're going to do is automate the production of a bunch of mediocre coffee. You got to learn to roast before you can automate a production roast. That's all there is. There's nothing else. So, this thing is a challenge, and it's a physical skill, and cupping is also a physical skill. You got to have a library of descriptors. You can't hit a target you can't taste. So you have to have a library of descriptors in your head that are associated with that flavor, because your brain is hardwired for pattern recognition. And the minute you have a label for a flavor, you're something like 1,000 times more likely to discern that flavor amidst other flavors. This is cupping. So, you're going to teach yourself that. You're going to calibrate with other people. You're going to decide what Meyer lemon is. You're going to decide what stone fruit is. You're going to decide what the difference between chlorogenic and citric and malic acidity, right? And the science of roasting is kind of understanding conductive and convective heat. How does loft affect how does loft affect the way the coffee can take heat convectively? There's some nuts and bolts things that are very useful so you understand what's going on in the drum. But at the end of the day, you got to have machine control, and you got to decide, hey, this is the roast profile. You're looking at it analytically. You're executing this roast. You're subtracting 15 seconds. You're putting those on the table. Identical roasts. Just one's 15 seconds faster to finish temp than the other. You're going to cup that out, and you're going to pick a winner. Now, what you've got to do is replicate that roast. You got to do exactly the same thing to get exactly the same cup.
Right.
And this is possible now. It was not possible even just a couple of years ago.
So it, if someone wants to go to that school, is it in person at Mill City? Like
Yeah.
they can fly out and go directly to that school?
Yeah, we do it every month, sometimes, usually twice a month in the
Okay.
summers.
I have a couple of people that would be 100% interested in that. So write that
Well, come
down.
on up. I'll comp you a seat.
Awesome. Sounds good, Steve. So right now, where do you see Mill City going in the next 10 years?
Well, we're doing a lot of work. So Roast Path is a gargantuan force multiplier for commercial roasteries. It is not an analog to Cropster or Artisan. It's a very different thing. Roast Path is designed, it's a software as a service logging system that is designed from the ground up for high level collaboration between peers. It kind of takes the idea of a social network. It's like Facebook, I suppose, or Reddit or whatever it is. But what people can do, you do your roasting in Roast Path, and you have the option to make your roast profiles public, or to share them, or to import them, or to export them. And you can go to the forum and you can say, hey, does anybody have a solid roast profile for such and so an Ethiopian coffee on a IR12, right? You can share that roast profile.
Nice.
So, the reason I did this was the reason coffee is in such an extremely sorry state professionally is because guys work in coffee for 20, 30 years and they've had this tremendous amount of knowledge and understanding, right? And they leave the industry and all of that goes with them. It evaporates. And you have to start from zero.
Right.
That's idiotic. I mean, it's just completely idiotic.
That's why I appreciate you sitting down, because I know a lot of people are going to enjoy this information. I feel a lot of people are starting from ground zero. They're having to start over, and I feel like people are kind of gatekeeping at this moment with their coffee knowledge.
Well, here's the thing. Back in the bad old days, right? You had your old broken down Probat or Ambex or whatever it was in the back, and somebody would walk into your roastery and you'd have a chalkboard and you'd have your roast profile written out on the chalkboard. And anytime anybody'd walk in, they'd cover it up with a sheet. I ain't kidding. This was a thing. Anybody that's
That's
been around
crazy.
long enough will be like, oh yeah, that's how it used to be. The reason they did that was because the only success that they had accomplished. So what they would do on these cruder systems, without drum speed or airflow control, or it's just a much cruder roaster. The only control that a guy has over your conductive convective heat ratio, kind of manage your thermal energy a little bit, was batch size, right? What would happen is, if you were on this old roaster, you would have to find coffees. You would have to find a green that kind of matched the natural roast profile of that roaster, right? And
Right.
you'll talk to these guys, and they'll say stuff like this. They'll be like, oh yeah, I really like Ethiopian coffee. Oh no, I don't like Rwandan coffee. Or, I don't like such and such an origin, right?
Right.
What that really means is when they put that coffee in their roaster, it was terrible. Okay.
Yeah.
The coffee was fine. But
Right.
when they put it in their roaster, it was awful out of the cooling tray. So they don't like that coffee. Okay, that's cool. I don't know, it's a free country, knock yourself out.
Right.
So what I wanted to do was create a system where the coffee would disappear behind the operator in the green, or the coffee. How do I say the operator, the roaster? Excuse me, the roaster disappears behind the operator in the green. I wanted to build a system that was flexible enough for a guy to do anything he wanted to with any coffee. So back to the old days, what would happen is a guy would roast for 3 years, and mysteriously one day out of the cooling tray, some coffee was epic, right? Well, that was their whole brand. That was their signature thing. And it was so valuable to them because they didn't have there was no way for them to replicate that, right? It was kind of a lucky
Right.
thing. And, if they shared it with somebody, well, then somebody else would have their, that it was super valuable because they couldn't do it with anything else.
For sure.
This is all they knew. So again, what's changed now, roasters are better, greens are better. There's more knowledge and understanding of coffee in general. There's very accomplished people, and there's the whole entire all of coffee is pretty dramatically improved. We're just not in that situation anymore. But people are sometimes, not everybody, there's still a pretty sizable number. They're kind of operating in a zero-sum environment. Like if you do good, I'm going to do bad. Which, if you stop and think about it, like we're only 2,000 miles away from each other. I'm
Right.
pretty sure that, if I'm selling locally here, my customers probably aren't your customers, and vice versa.
For
Right?
sure.
So I think we're ready now as an industry to start to aggregate some of our understanding of the process and the coffee and the machine control techniques. And that's what RoastPath was built for. So right now, today, I think there's like 782 members. They've logged 127,000 roasts. And I can go back and I can say, okay, I got a washed, Colombian coffee. I can grab every single roast of washed Colombian coffee. I can generate a 1 standard deviation roast profile and use that as a starting point for that coffee. It gets me to good, unlike maybe the first or second roast. And from there, then I can dial it in as much as I want. If good is good enough, okay, that's fine.
Right.
But if I want to keep pushing the envelope and work that coffee for a week or so, if it's a solid green, I can probably do something pretty great with it. And then I can share that. Hey, this is what I did.
For sure.
I don't know. It's either going to be a super cool thing or I'm going to go broke doing it. I don't know. Jury's out. We'll see.
I don't think you're going to go broke, Steve. I think you got something going good. So as far as someone starting out, what if they had to start on a specific roaster in the beginning and they're not looking to break the bank, what roaster would you pick for them?
The one that I recommend more, when people come to me, they're thinking about commercial roasting, right?
Right.
So I think the best roaster right now today to learn to develop any genuine craft on is probably the Aleo Bullet. I recommend that. I mean, those dudes should send me a check. I recommend that so much.
Right.
If I was a home roaster, that is absolutely what I would buy. Now, it's $3,000. The advantage of it is it plugs into the wall. You don't need fancy venting. You're up and running, and it's enough to get a guy. If you were gonna roast from home, maybe try to sell some coffee. You could probably get to 30, 40 pounds a week out the door on a regular basis.
Right.
It's a place to get proof of concept. If a guy's playing around with it as a hobby, Beemore, Gene Cafe, whatever it is, Fresh Roast. I mean, any of the appliance roasters. What I'm going to tell you is your results will be as good as kind of a not very good commercial drum roaster,
Right.
in the Hanson. This is the thing, there's this idea that, roasters don't matter. Well, roasters don't matter when, you're not doing a great job with the coffee.
For sure.
It's pretty easy to make crappy coffee on even the best roaster, and it's pretty easy to make equivalent coffee on the worst roaster. Where roasters matter is, when they matter in a very specific business sense. You need a reliable if you're going to sell coffee, you need a reliable roaster. That's it. Because it's a lot easier to win an account than it is to keep it.
For sure.
So, and dudes are going to show up Monday looking for coffee. And if you don't have coffee, they're buying someplace else. So, it's, again, like you say, if I'm just starting out, anything with airflow control and a dryer will teach you something about coffee. And Be More will teach you something about coffee. You'll learn, the phases, first crack, development. You'll learn inner and outer seed. You may even learn a little bit about cupping. I mean, it's cool. None of all of this is valid, but it's a stepping stone to something else. And even here, the last thing I'll tell you about this, if you are going to have an in-place and operating standalone commercial roastery, an owner-operated commercial roastery, you're going to need a 10K. You gotta get to a 10K, because you're only going to get to roast about 4 hours a day, and you're going to spend 6-8 hours a day doing everything else. You're going to package coffee, deliver coffee, invoice coffee, chase down deadbeat customers to pay their invoices for their coffee, clean the bathrooms, clean the chaff collector. You're working 6 days a week. You're probably 10 hours a day solid, right? For the 10 kilogram roaster output is about 80 pounds finished coffee per hour. Wholesale, if you're selling wholesale, you're going to net out your gross net after cost of goods sold going to be about $5 a bag or $5 a pound. So you get about $400 an hour productive capacity on a 10K. You're going to roast about 4 hours a day at $1,600 a day. You can build a pretty solid little business on that before you got to hire somebody, right? So the Aleo Bullet, the Baymore, the 1K, the 3 kilogram Mill City, whatever it is, those are all stepping stones to 10, 15, or 20 kilogram roaster where you can actually make some pretty serious money.
Right. So before we get off here, Steve, I do a daily quick shot. So any tip right now in under 30 seconds, what would you give someone to start a successful roastery or to be a successful entrepreneur? Go.
Embrace failure. 50% of what you do isn't going to work. So you got to fail small. You got to fail in ways that aren't existential. And you got to not be afraid to fail. But when you find something that works, do more of that. Okay. It's pretty simple.
For sure. All right, Steve. Well, our time has come to an end. I appreciate you sitting down with me and talking roasters. I know a lot of people are going to enjoy this episode. I'm also going to link this below. Everyone go check out Mill City Roasters right now, especially if you're getting into roasting and you are wanting to up to a bigger machine. Check out Mill City. Also, he had mentioned his classes in Minnesota. So if you are interested in being a roaster and you want to learn a more in-depth process, make a trip out to Minnesota and take that class. All right, Steve, I appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity, Josh. You take care.
Yes, sir. You too.